They scattered his ashes at sea to prevent a shrine, but within months his sons were already building bombs. The execution of Adolf Eichmann in 1962 was supposed to close the darkest chapter of the 20th century. Instead, it opened a new one. 3 of his 4 sons transformed their father's death into a twisted mission, turning grief into terrorism and courtroom justice into generational rage. While the world celebrated the hanging of one of history's most notorious architects of genocide, they missed what was happening in the shadows, a family fracturing between those who would carry the hatred forward and one son who would break the cycle. The respected man who lived on Garibaldi Street was a lie built on industrial-scale murder. Buenos Aires, 1950. Ricardo Clement arrived with his wife and 4 sons. He worked at a Mercedes-Benz factory. He paid his bills on time. Neighbors knew him as quiet, disciplined, unremarkable. His sons attended local schools. They spoke Spanish with German accents. They called him Father, never by his real name. Adolf Eichmann had escaped Europe with help from Catholic clergy and Nazi networks. He had organized the logistics of genocide, train schedules, deportation quotas, the machinery of death for 6 million Jews. Now, he assembled car parts. The transformation was complete on paper. But ideology doesn't vanish with a name change. At home, behind closed doors, the lessons continued. Eichmann never recanted, never apologized. He taught his sons that the world had misunderstood him, that history would vindicate their family name. The poison passed from father to sons like an inheritance, and they believed every word. The fatal bouquet that destroyed everything was meant as a romantic gesture. March 1960. Klaus Eichmann brought flowers home for his girlfriend Sylvia Hermann. A simple act, a normal moment. But Sylvia's father Lothar was a half-Jewish German immigrant who had fled the Nazis. When Klaus mentioned his father's anniversary, the same date Adolf Eichmann had married, Lothar Hermann's suspicions ignited. He contacted Fritz Bauer, a German prosecutor hunting Nazi war criminals. Bauer passed the intelligence to Mossad. The Israeli intelligence agency had been searching for Eichmann for 15 years. Now they had an address. May 11th, 1960. Eichmann stepped off the bus on Garibaldi Street after his shift at the factory. Mossad agents grabbed him. They dragged him into a car. The entire operation took seconds. Neighbors saw nothing unusual. For 9 days, they held him in a safe house. Eichmann was forced to confirm his identity. He eventually admitted who he was. The mask of Ricardo Clement dissolved. The man responsible for coordinating the Holocaust sat in a bare room, his cover destroyed by his son's careless pride. On May 20th, Mossad agents drugged him and dressed him as a flight attendant. They smuggled him onto an El Al plane. When he woke, he was in Israel. The trial would expose everything, and his sons were watching. The world watches as history puts a monster on trial. But for his sons, every broadcast is a humiliation that demands revenge. April 11th, 1961. The trial began in Jerusalem. Adolf Eichmann sat in a bulletproof glass booth, headphones translating testimony into German. Cameras broadcast every moment to millions across the globe. Survivors testified. They described cattle cars packed with human cargo, gas chambers disguised as showers, children torn from mothers' arms. Eichmann showed no emotion. He claimed he was following orders, just a bureaucrat, just doing his job. The trial lasted 4 months. Over 100 witnesses gave testimony. The evidence was overwhelming. Documents bearing his signature, orders he had issued, the systematic machinery of death he had coordinated. On December 15, 1961, the verdict came down. Guilty on all 15 counts. The sentence, death by hanging. In Argentina, his sons absorbed every word. The trial wasn't justice to them. It was theater. A show trial designed to humiliate their family name. The testimonies weren't truth. They were propaganda. And their father wasn't a war criminal. He was a martyr being sacrificed to appease Jewish vengeance. The appeals process dragged on for months. Eichmann's lawyers argued technicalities. Israel's Supreme Court rejected every motion. The execution date was set, and in the shadows, three brothers began planning how to make the world pay for what it had done to their father. From ashes to ideology, grief transformed into something far more dangerous than mourning. It became a mission. Just before midnight, on May 31st, 1962, Adolf Eichmann walked to the gallows at Ramla prison. His last words were defiant. He declared himself a German officer who had served his country. He expressed no remorse. The trap door opened. His neck snapped. Within hours, his body was cremated and his ashes scattered beyond Israel's territorial waters. The execution was supposed to bring closure. Instead, it created martyrs in the eyes of his sons. Klaus, Horst, and Dieter Eichmann didn't grieve like ordinary children who had lost a father. They radicalized. The trial had exposed their childhood lie. Ricardo Clement was Adolf Eichmann, architect of genocide. But instead of rejecting their father's legacy, they embraced it with renewed fervor. They made contact with neo-Nazi networks across Europe, former SS officers, underground fascist cells, extremist groups operating in Spain, Germany, and Austria. The brothers attended secret meetings. They absorbed propaganda. They studied bomb-making techniques and guerrilla tactics. By 1963, they had become active participants in far-right terrorism. Klaus worked with groups planning attacks against Jewish targets. Horst developed connections with Arab extremist organizations who shared their hatred of Israel. Dieter, the youngest, served as courier and recruiter. The ideology their father had planted in childhood now bloomed into operational violence. They didn't just believe Jews were the enemy. They were preparing to act on that belief with explosives and assassination plots. But there were four sons, and the fourth, Ricardo Francisco, chose a different path. While his brothers descended into extremism, he walked away. He changed his name. He built a life separate from the poison. The family fractured along the fault line of choice, those who doubled down on hatred and one who refused to carry it forward. The terror cell that formed in the shadow of their father's execution had a target that revealed the depth of their depravity. Jewish children. 1964. The Eichmann brothers weren't just attending neo-Nazi meetings anymore. They were operational. Intelligence agencies across Europe had begun tracking their movements. Horst Eichmann had made multiple trips to Spain and Austria, meeting with former SS officers who had escaped prosecution. Klaus maintained contact with extremist cells in Germany. Together, they were building something deadly. The plan they developed was chilling in its deliberate cruelty. They intended to bomb Jewish community centers and schools. The targets weren't military installations or government buildings. They were places where children gathered, synagogues during services, cultural centers during holiday celebrations. The goal was maximum civilian casualties, specifically targeting the children of Holocaust survivors. It was their father's work continued by different means. Adolf Eichmann had sent children to gas chambers. His sons wanted to blow them apart with explosives. By 1965, they had acquired bomb-making materials. They had conducted surveillance on potential targets. They had established safe houses and communication networks. The planning was meticulous, methodical, traits inherited directly from their father's bureaucratic approach to mass murder. But intelligence services were closing in. Mossad had been monitoring the brothers since the execution. German authorities had opened investigations. The net was tightening. And when it finally closed, the world would discover just how completely justice had failed to kill the ideology it had tried to bury at sea. The split that defined the Eichmann legacy came down to a single question. Does blood determine destiny? Three brothers chose terrorism. Ricardo Francisco chose silence and distance. He changed his name, rejected his father's ideology, and disappeared into anonymity. The terror plots were eventually disrupted. The brothers scattered across continents, their hatred intact, but their plans exposed. Justice hanged Adolf Eichmann, but it couldn't hang his ideas. Those lived on in the sons who refused to let them die.